The small apartment in Kyoto filled with the sound of a child's laughter, followed by the unmistakable screech of violin strings being played for the first time. Aki Suzuki, just 5 years old, dragged the bow across the strings while his twin brother Hiro watched with wide eyes, waiting for his turn at the piano their parents had saved for 3 years to buy. Their mother Yumiko smiled as she watched them from the kitchen doorway. She had been a music teacher before the twins were born, and their father Takeshi played cello in a local orchestra. Neither had become famous, but music had given their lives meaning. They hoped it might do the same for their sons. "Gently, Aki," Yumiko said, putting down her dish towel and kneeling beside her son. "Like this." She guided his small hand, showing him how to hold the bow properly. The sound improved slightly, though it was still far from beautiful. But there was something in the way Aki bit his lip in concentration, the way his eyes lit up when he produced a clear note, that told Yumiko this wasn't just a passing interest. Next door, their elderly neighbor Mrs. Tanaka banged on the wall. "Some of us need to sleep," she shouted. Yumiko sighed. "We'll practice more tomorrow," she whispered to the disappointed boy. That night, after the twins had gone to bed, Yumiko and Takeshi spoke in hushed voices. "They both have something special," Takeshi said, sipping his tea. "Did you see how Hiro watched his brother? And how he's always tapping out rhythms on the table?" "Yes, but music lessons are expensive," Yumiko replied. "And 2 instruments? 2 sets of lessons? How would we manage?" Takeshi took his wife's hand. "We'll find a way. My parents didn't support my music. I don't want our sons looking back with the same regrets." The next day, Takeshi brought home a smaller violin for Aki and adjusted the piano bench so Hiro could reach the keys. The boys practiced every day after school, first at their neighbor's house during Mrs. Tanaka's afternoon soap operas, then later at a community center where the staff took a liking to the serious little boys who bowed politely and thanked them for the space. By age 7, the twins were playing simple duets together. By 10, local music teachers were running out of things to teach them. "They need better instruction than I can give," said Mr. Nakamura, their violin teacher, after watching Aki play a piece meant for students twice his age. "There's a special music school in Tokyo." The family gathered around their small kitchen table that evening. Maps and brochures spread out before them. "It would mean moving," Yumiko said, worry creasing her forehead. "New jobs, a new apartment? Or I could stay here with the boys during the week and you could come on weekends," Takeshi suggested. Hiro and Aki exchanged glances. They'd heard their parents arguing about money lately. "We don't have to go," Aki said suddenly. "We can keep playing here," Hiro added. Their parents looked at them with surprise. Then Takeshi smiled. "When did you two get so grown up? But this isn't something you should worry about. Your job is to play music." 3 months later, the family moved to a tiny apartment in Tokyo, near enough to the music school that the boys could walk there. Takeshi found work playing in wedding orchestras and giving private lessons. Yumiko taught piano to beginners. They made enough to get by, but just barely. The twins, now 11, found themselves surrounded by other gifted young musicians for the first time. Some came from wealthy families with connections in the music world. Some had been playing on full-sized professional instruments since they were toddlers. A few treated the Suzuki twins like country bumpkins who didn't belong. "Your bow technique is all wrong," a boy named Kenji told Aki during their first week. "And your brother hunches too much at the piano. My father is the concertmaster of the Tokyo Symphony, and he says posture is everything." Aki felt his face grow hot with shame and anger. That evening, he practiced his bowing for 3 hours straight until his arm ached and his mother made him stop. "Why are you pushing yourself so hard?" she asked, rubbing ointment into his sore arm. "I have to be better," Aki muttered. "Some of the kids said we don't belong here," Yumiko sighed. "There will always be people who try to make you feel small. The question is, will you let them?" Over the next few years, the twins let their music speak for them. They practiced before school, during lunch breaks, and late into the evening. Their teachers were impressed by their dedication as much as their talent. By 15, they were performing in student concerts, always together. Something magical happened when they played as a duo, each anticipating the other's interpretations, breathing together, thinking as one. Their big break came when they were 17. The renowned pianist Li Wei was giving a master class at their school and needed students to demonstrate. "You," he said, pointing at Hiro, Play Mozart's Sonata in C major. Hiro glanced at Aki, then sat at the piano and began to play. The piece was one they'd practiced often together, Aki's violin weaving around Hiro's piano. Playing it alone felt wrong somehow, like speaking only half of a conversation. Li Wei listened with his eyes closed. When Hiro finished, the room was silent. "Good technique," Li Wei said finally. "But something is missing. You play like you're waiting for someone else." "My brother," Hiro said simply. "We usually play this together." Li Wei raised an eyebrow. "Brother?" "A violinist." When Hiro nodded, he said, "Bring him. Let me hear you both." The next day, the twins played for Li Wei, who watched them with growing interest. When they finished, he was silent for a long moment. "You have something rare," he said finally. "Not just talent. Plenty of students have talent. You have connection. You think as one. This is what chamber music is supposed to be, but few achieve it." He wrote something on a card and handed it to them. "My friend runs a summer program in Kyoto. It's very selective, but I'm recommending you both. Don't waste this opportunity." The summer program changed everything. The twins worked with musicians from across Asia, learning new techniques, expanding their repertoire. More importantly, they began to find their own voice as performers. Their playing became less about technical perfection and more about emotional expression. A video of their final performance, Aki's violin and Hiro's piano in perfect conversation through a challenging Beethoven sonata, was posted online by another student. It caught the attention of a music journalist who wrote a small piece about the remarkable Suzuki twins in a Tokyo arts magazine. From there, things moved quickly. They were invited to play at a festival in Seoul, then in Hong Kong. After graduating from high school, they were offered scholarships to the Tokyo University of the Arts, where they continued to develop their unique style. "You play Western classical music with Japanese souls," their professor told them. "This is not a criticism. The music needs new interpretations, new voices. But be prepared. Not everyone will understand what you're doing." She was right. As the twins began to gain recognition, they also faced resistance, particularly from traditionalists who believed classical music should be played as the composer intended, which usually meant as Europeans play it. At a competition in Singapore, a judge told them their Bach was technically perfect but culturally disconnected. At a masterclass in Beijing, a visiting German conductor suggested they stick to Asian composers who might better suit your sensibilities. These comments stung, but the twins persisted. They practiced harder, studied the history and context of each piece they played, and sought out mentors who could help them grow without dimming their unique perspective. By the time they graduated from university, the Suzuki twins had built a loyal following across Asia. Music lovers appreciated their technical brilliance combined with emotional depth. Fellow musicians respected their dedication and innovative approach to classical standards. Yet the Western classical establishment remained largely closed to them. European and American concert halls rarely featured Asian performers unless they were already international stars. Critics dismissed Asian musicians as technical but soulless players, even as audiences responded enthusiastically to their performances. "We need to be so good they can't ignore us," Aki said one evening as they practiced in their small Tokyo apartment, now cluttered with awards and programs from their performances. "Or we need a breakthrough moment," Hiro replied, stretching his fingers before returning to the piano, "something that makes people really see us." Neither realized that moment would come soon, and in a way they never could have imagined. As they prepared for their next concert tour of Asian cities, an email arrived that would change the course of their careers forever. The message was brief: an invitation to appear on Classical Spotlight, a popular television program hosted by the famous British conductor Malcolm Whitfield. Known for his brilliance and his biting criticism, Whitfield's show was watched by classical music lovers worldwide. This was the opportunity they had been waiting for, a chance to show the Western world what they could do. It was also a risk. Whitfield was known for challenging guests with difficult pieces and pointed criticism. "Should we accept?" Hiro asked, looking at his brother. Aki nodded slowly. "Yes, it's time for people to hear us." Neither twin could have predicted just how many people would end up hearing them, or how their appearance would spark a conversation about who owns classical music. that would reach far beyond the world of string instruments and concert halls. The email sat in their inbox for 3 days before the twins worked up the courage to reply. The invitation to appear on Classical Spotlight felt too good to be true. The show aired globally and had featured some of the most respected musicians in the world. For two young performers from Japan who'd never played professionally outside of Asia, it was both thrilling and terrifying. "What if it's a mistake?" Hiro said, staring at his phone screen. "Maybe they meant to invite someone else." Aki shook his head. "They mentioned our Bach performance from the Hong Kong festival. They've seen us play." Their small apartment in Tokyo was cluttered with sheet music and empty teacups. Through the thin walls, they could hear their neighbor practicing trumpet. The notes muffled but persistent. "We should call Mom and Dad," Hiro suggested. Their parents still lived in Kyoto, where Takeshi continued to play cello for local orchestras, and Yumiko taught piano to neighborhood children. They had never pushed their sons toward fame, only toward excellence. When they shared the news, their father was quiet for a long moment. "Malcolm Whitfield," he finally said. "I've seen his program. He can be difficult." "What do you mean?" Aki asked. "He has very firm ideas about classical music, traditional ideas, and he's not always kind to those who don't fit his mold." The twins exchanged glances. They knew what their father was saying without him having to spell it out. Whitfield was known for his purist approach to classical music and his skepticism about Asian performers' interpretations of Western compositions. "Do you think we shouldn't go?" Hiro asked softly. "No," their father replied. "I think you must go, but be prepared. Play your best and remember that his opinion is just one man's opinion. It doesn't define your worth as musicians." After hanging up, the twins sat in silence for a while. Finally, Aki picked up his violin and began to tune it. "What are you doing?" Hiro asked. "Practicing," Aki replied simply. "If we're going to face Whitfield, we need to be better than we've ever been." The next few weeks were a blur of preparation. They selected pieces that showcased their technical abilities and emotional range. They researched past episodes of Classical Spotlight, studying Whitfield's interviewing style and the kinds of questions he asked. They even practiced speaking English with a tutor, wanting to be understood clearly. Their manager, Kenta, who had been with them since their university days, handled the practical details: flights, accommodations, contracts. He also tried to prepare them mentally. "This is a huge opportunity," he told them over dinner at a small ramen shop near their apartment. "But it's also a risk. Whitfield has a reputation." "We know," Hiro said, stirring his noodles absently. "He's especially tough on Asian musicians," Kenta continued. "Last year he had a Chinese pianist on the show and questioned whether she could truly understand Chopin. It caused quite a stir, so why did he invite us?" Aki wondered. Kenta shrugged. "Ratings? Controversy gets viewers. Or maybe he genuinely wants to hear you play. Either way, you need to be ready for anything." As the date approached, the twins received more details about the show. It would be filmed in London, in front of a live studio audience. They would perform 2 pieces of their choosing, plus one selected by Whitfield himself, which would be revealed only 24 hours before the show, a notorious practice that had unnerved many previous guests. "It's a test," their old teacher, Mr. Nakamura, said when they called him for advice. "He wants to see how you handle pressure, how quickly you can learn something new." "What if we can't play it well enough?" Hiro worried. "Then you admit it honestly," Mr. Nakamura replied. "Better to acknowledge limitations than to pretend. But I don't think that will happen. You two have always been quick studies." The night before their flight to London, the twins couldn't sleep. They sat on the balcony of their apartment, looking out at the Tokyo skyline glittering in the darkness. "Do you remember when we first started playing together?" Aki asked. "How terrible we sounded." Hiro laughed. "Mrs. Tanaka used to cover her ears when she saw us coming with our instruments. And now we're going to play for one of the most famous conductors in the world, on live TV." They fell silent, the enormity of it sinking in. "No matter what happens," Aki said finally, "we have each other." Hiro nodded, always. The flight to London was the twins' first time leaving Asia. They pressed their faces to the airplane windows like children, watching as the landscape changed beneath them, mountains giving way to deserts, then to the patchwork fields of Europe, and finally to the sprawling city of London, crisscrossed by the winding Thames. Their hotel was modest but comfortable, located in a bustling neighborhood filled with music shops and cafes. After checking in, they took their instruments to a small practice room the hotel had arranged for them. Should we run through the Bach again? Hiro suggested. Aki shook his head. Let's save our energy. We know those pieces. Let's see what Whitfield has in store for us. They didn't have to wait long. That evening, a courier delivered a sealed envelope containing sheet music for Liszt's La Campanella, arranged as a violin and piano duet. He's not making this easy, Hiro murmured as he scanned the complex piano part. Did you expect him to? Aki replied, already studying the violin score. They practiced late into the night despite their jet lag. The piece was fiendishly difficult, with rapid passages that required perfect coordination between them. By midnight, they had worked through it enough to feel they understood its structure, though their fingers still stumbled over the most challenging sections. Enough, Kenta said, appearing at the practice room door. You need to rest. You can't play well if you're exhausted. Reluctantly, they returned to their room. Despite their fatigue, sleep came fitfully. They were awake before dawn, back in the practice room as the first gray light filtered through the windows. By the time they needed to leave for the studio, they had played through La Campanella dozens of times. It wasn't perfect, but it was respectable, especially considering they'd had less than 24 hours to prepare. The BBC studios were larger than they had imagined, a maze of corridors and sound stages. Staff members with headsets rushed past them, barely glancing their way. They were shown to a small green room where they could warm up and wait. How are you feeling? Kenta asked, straightening Hiro's collar. Nervous, Hiro admitted. Good, Kenta replied. Nerves keep you sharp. A production assistant appeared at the door. 10 minutes, please. Mr. Whitfield would like to meet you before you go on air. The twins followed her to a private office where Malcolm Whitfield was reviewing notes. In person, he was taller than he appeared on television, with sharp blue eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they took in. His silver hair was impeccably styled, and he wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than all the clothes the twins owned combined. Ah, the Suzuki brothers, he said, not rising from his seat. Thank you for coming such a long way. His accent was crisp, his tone polite but not warm. He gestured for them to sit in the chairs across from his desk. I've watched your performances with interest, he continued. You have undeniable technical skill. Thank you, Aki said, sensing there was more coming. However, Whitfield added, confirming Aki's suspicion, I find myself curious about your interpretation of the Western canon. So many Asian musicians seem to focus on technique at the expense of emotional understanding. The twins had heard this criticism before, the implication that they could play the notes but not grasp the cultural context behind them. It was a common prejudice faced by non-Western classical musicians. We believe music speaks a universal language, Hiro said carefully, though each performer brings their own perspective. Whitfield's smile didn't reach his eyes. Indeed, well, we shall see, won't we? I trust you've had time to review the Liszt piece I selected? Yes, sir, Aki replied. It's challenging but beautiful. As all worthwhile things are, Whitfield said. He checked his watch. We should head to the stage. The audience is waiting. As they walked through the corridors to the soundstage, Hiro whispered to his brother, He's exactly as Dad warned us. Aki nodded slightly. Just remember, we play for the music, not for him. The stage was brightly lit with 2 grand pianos, several chairs, and a backdrop featuring famous composers. The audience, about 100 people, applauded as Whitfield entered, followed by the twins. Good evening and welcome to Classical Spotlight, Whitfield said to the camera. Tonight, we have with us the Suzuki twins from Japan who have been making quite a stir in the Asian classical music scene. Aki on violin and Hiro on piano, they specialize in duet performances of traditional Western compositions. His emphasis on Western was subtle but unmistakable. Welcome to London, he said, turning to them. Perhaps you could begin by telling us how 2 young men from Japan developed such an interest in European classical music. The twins could feel the weight of the audience's attention, the red light of the camera. This was it, their moment to prove themselves on a global stage. Despite the undercurrent of condescension in Whitfield's question, they smiled and began to tell their story, unaware that the evening would unfold in ways none of them could have predicted. The bright studio lights felt hotter than the twins had expected. Under their glare, Aki and Hiro sat straight-backed on the elegant chairs provided for them, trying to appear calm despite the nervousness churning in their stomachs. The cameras tracked was happening. The twins were challenging Whitfield directly on live television. For a moment, genuine alarm flashed across the conductor's face. Then he recovered, forcing a laugh. "I'm afraid I must decline. I'm here as host, not performer. But you're a renowned pianist," Aki pressed. "Surely a piece you selected as a challenge for us would be well within your capabilities." The trap was set, and Whitfield knew it. If he refused, he would appear afraid or incapable. If he accepted, he would have to prove he could meet the standard he had set for others. The audience was watching intently now. Someone in the back began to clap slowly, encouraging Whitfield to accept the challenge. Others joined in, the applause building. "Well," Whitfield said, tugging at his collar slightly, "this is most irregular, but I suppose, in the spirit of good sportsmanship." He stood and approached the piano as Hiro stepped aside with a polite bow. The audience applauded enthusiastically, excited by this unexpected turn of events. As Whitfield settled at the piano bench, adjusting it to his height, Aki caught his brother's eye. They had endured the conductor's condescension and thinly veiled prejudice with grace. Now it was time to let the music speak for itself. Little did Whitfield know that the twins had chosen this moment carefully, setting the stage for what would become one of the most talked-about episodes in the show's history. The studio hummed with a new energy as Whitfield settled himself at the piano. Gone was the relaxed confidence of the host. In its place was the slightly stiff posture of a man who suddenly found himself on the spot. He flexed his fingers and adjusted the bench, buying himself a few moments to collect his thoughts. In the control room, producers whispered urgently to each other. This wasn't in the script. The show's format called for Whitfield to remain the authoritative judge, not to become a participant. But the ratings monitor was already showing a spike in viewership as word spread on social media about what was happening. "Shall we begin?" Aki asked politely, his violin poised. Whitfield cleared his throat. "Of course. Though I must say I haven't practiced this particular arrangement recently." "That's all right," Aki replied with a small smile. "Neither had we until yesterday." A ripple of laughter ran through the audience. Someone in the back whispered, "Good for them," just loud enough to be heard. Aki raised his bow, made eye contact with Whitfield, and nodded once. The conductor took a deep breath and placed his hands on the keys. From the first notes, it was clear that something was off. While Aki played the opening violin passage with grace, Whitfield's entrance on the piano was hesitant, his timing slightly behind. He frowned in concentration, clearly struggling to recall the complex fingerings of Liszt's notoriously difficult composition. Aki continued steadily, giving Whitfield every opportunity to find his footing. But as they approached the first difficult passage, a series of lightning-fast arpeggios that required perfect coordination between violin and piano, Whitfield faltered. His right hand stumbled over the keys, producing a jumble of wrong notes that clashed harshly with Aki's violin. Whitfield stopped abruptly. "I apologize," he said, forcing a smile. "Let's begin again." The audience stirred. This was unprecedented. Whitfield, who had built his reputation on musical perfection and uncompromising standards, was asking for a do-over on his own show. Aki nodded graciously. Of course, they started again. This time Whitfield managed the opening section with more confidence, his fingers finding the correct keys. But as they moved into the piece's middle section, where the tempo increased and the harmonies grew more complex, he began to struggle once more. His left hand missed a crucial bass note, throwing off the harmony. He compensated by simplifying some of the more complex passages, playing basic chords where the score called for intricate figurations. To a casual listener, it might have sounded passable, but to the musically educated audience in the studio, it was obvious he was cutting corners. Aki, meanwhile, played his part flawlessly. Each note of his violin sang clear and true, each phrase shaped with careful intention. He didn't draw attention to Whitfield's mistakes or adjust his tempo to make things easier. He simply played the piece as written, demanding that Whitfield keep up. Sweat began to bead on Whitfield's forehead. His breathing grew audible, picked up by the sensitive microphones positioned above the piano. As they approached the most technically demanding section of the piece, a series of rapid, leaping intervals that spanned the keyboard, his confidence visibly crumbled. His fingers tangled, hitting wrong notes and then freezing entirely. After several painful seconds of confusion, he lifted his hands from the keys. "I think that's enough," he said, his voice tight. "This arrangement is quite different from the solo piano version I'm familiar with." Aki lowered his violin. "Would you prefer we stop?" The question hung in the air. To agree would be to admit defeat, to acknowledge that he couldn't perform to the standard he demanded of others. From his seat at the side of the stage, Hero watched the internal struggle play out on Whitfield's face. He felt no joy in the conductor's humiliation, only a quiet vindication. Their point wasn't to embarrass him, but to challenge the assumption that cultural background determined musical understanding. "Perhaps," Whitfield said finally, "we should return to the original format of the show. This has been an interesting diversion, but our viewers tuned in to hear you play, not me." A murmur ran through the audience. Everyone understood what was happening. Whitfield was backing down. "Actually," called a voice from the audience, "I'd quite like to hear you finish the piece." Heads turned to see who had spoken. It was an elderly woman in the third row, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun, her eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Dame Eleanor Hughes," someone whispered loudly enough for the microphones to pick up, "from the Royal Academy." Whitfield paled slightly. Dame Eleanor was a legendary piano teacher whose approval could make or break careers in the classical music world. "I agree," said another audience member. "Please continue." More voices joined in, the crowd clearly invested in seeing the challenge through to its conclusion. Whitfield looked to his producer for help, but the man merely shrugged, gesturing for them to continue. The cameras were rolling and the unexpected drama was too good to cut short. "Very well," Whitfield said stiffly, "though I must remind everyone that conducting is my primary focus these days. One's piano technique naturally becomes rusty when one spends more time with the baton than the keyboard." It was an excuse and everyone knew it. Many great conductors maintained their instrumental skills throughout their careers, but no one called him on it. They simply waited for the music to resume. Aki raised his violin again. "From the Allegro section?" he suggested. Whitfield nodded, placing his hands on the keys with visible reluctance. What followed was painful to watch. As they moved into the most technically demanding part of the piece, Whitfield's limitations became impossible to disguise. His fingers seemed to work against each other, producing a muddy approximation of Liszt's crystalline passages. Twice he lost his place entirely, leaving awkward gaps in the music that Aki's violin could not fill alone. In the audience, Dame Eleanor shook her head slightly. Other professional musicians in attendance exchanged knowing glances. This wasn't just opening night. Jitters or a lack of practice, Whitfield simply couldn't play the piece he had assigned as a challenge after a particularly disastrous passage where Whitfield's hands seemed to be playing in two different keys. He stopped again. "I think we've made the point," he said, his voice tight with suppressed anger. "La Campanella is indeed a challenging piece, especially when presented with such short notice." "Yes," Aki agreed quietly. 24 hours isn't much time to prepare." The implication hung in the air. The twins had managed it, why couldn't he? An uncomfortable silence filled the studio. The producer made a slashing motion across his throat, signaling for a commercial break. But the floor director whispered something to him, and he reluctantly let the cameras continue rolling. "Perhaps," Hero suggested, rising from his seat, "I might join my brother to complete the piece? Our audience deserves to hear it as it was meant to be played." It was both a gracious offer and a subtle challenge. Whitfield hesitated, clearly torn between relief at escaping the spotlight and embarrassment at being replaced. "That seems appropriate," he said finally, standing up from the piano bench with as much dignity as he could muster. As he and Hero passed each other, the young pianist bowed slightly, a gesture of respect that, under the circumstances, felt almost like mercy. The moment Hero sat down at the piano, something in the atmosphere changed. He and Aki exchanged a glance, took a breath together, and began to play from the very beginning of the piece. The difference was immediate and striking. Where there had been hesitation and discord, now there was fluidity and harmony. The twins moved through the piece with a synchronicity that seemed almost supernatural, each anticipating the other's interpretative choices, each responding to subtle cues that only they could sense. Their performance wasn't just technically proficient, it was alive with emotion and understanding. The playful sections danced with joy. The lyrical passages sang with genuine feeling. Even the most challenging technical sections flowed with an effortless grace that made them seem simpler than they were. In the audience, Dame Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes bright with interest. Other professional musicians nodded appreciatively, some tapping their fingers in time with the music. Even those with less musical education could sense they were witnessing something special. Whitfield stood to the side, his expression carefully neutral, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. Whatever he was feeling, anger, embarrassment, perhaps even a reluctant admiration, he kept it hidden behind a professional mask. As the twins reached the final section of the piece, they seemed to forget where they were. The cameras, the audience, even Whitfield faded away. They played for the pure joy of the music, for the connection they shared through it. Hiro's fingers flew across the keys, Aki's bow danced across the strings, and Liszt's composition came to life in a way that transcended cultural boundaries and musical politics. When they played the final notes, there was a moment of complete silence in the studio. Then the audience erupted in applause, many rising to their feet. Whistles and cheers joined the clapping, creating a wave of sound that washed over the stage. The twins bowed deeply, first to the audience, then pointedly to Whitfield. The conductor had no choice but to acknowledge them with a tight smile and a nod. "Impressive," he said, his microphone barely picking up the word over the continuing applause. As the noise began to die down, Dame Eleanor's voice cut through the studio. "Mr. Whitfield," she called, "I believe you owe these young men an apology." The audience fell silent again, all eyes turning to the conductor. The cameras zoomed in on his face, capturing the conflict that played across it, pride warring with the knowledge that he had been publicly proven wrong. He began, then stopped. The studio held its breath, waiting to see if the famous Malcolm Whitfield, known for his uncompromising opinions and refusal to back down, would admit he had misjudged the Suzuki twins. What happened next would be replayed on social media millions of times in the coming days, sparking a conversation about cultural bias in classical music that would extend far beyond the world of television talk shows and concert halls. The studio fell so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. All eyes were on Malcolm Whitfield as Dame Eleanor's words hung in the air. "I believe you owe these young men an apology." Whitfield stood frozen, his face a battleground of emotions, pride fighting against the undeniable evidence of what everyone had just witnessed. For a man who had built his career on being the authority, the arbiter of musical excellence, this moment represented something close to professional disaster. The floor manager made a slashing motion across his throat, signaling to cut to commercial, but the producer overruled him with a quick shake of his head. Whatever happened next would be ratings gold. After what felt like an eternity, Whitfield cleared his throat. "It seems," he said carefully, each word measured, "that I may have underestimated the depth of your understanding of this piece." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was more than anyone had expected from the notoriously stubborn conductor. "These young musicians," Dame Eleanor called out again, her voice carrying the authority of her decades in the classical music world, "have just demonstrated that music transcends the boundaries we too often try to place around it." Their performance was not just technically proficient, it was deeply felt and beautifully interpreted. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience. Someone started to clap and soon others joined in, the applause building into another standing ovation. The twins, still standing center stage, bowed again, their faces flushed with a mixture of relief and triumph. It wasn't just that they had performed well, they had made their point in the most powerful way possible, through the music itself. When the applause finally died down, Whitfield seemed to have regained some of his composure. Years of live television had taught him how to salvage difficult situations. "Well," he said, forcing a smile, "this has certainly been one of our more memorable episodes. I think we can all agree that music has the power to surprise us, to challenge our preconceptions." He turned to the twins. "Thank you for joining us tonight and for your illuminating performance." With that, he signaled to the cameras and the show's closing theme began to play. As the credits rolled, the audience continued to buzz with excitement. Several people made their way to the stage to speak with the twins, including Dame Eleanor, who clasped each of their hands warmly. "Magnificent," she told them, simply magnificent. You must come play at the academy while you're in London. Behind the scenes, Whitfield disappeared quickly into his dressing room, brushing off attempts by the producers to discuss what had happened. The door closed firmly behind him, the sound of a lock clicking into place. The twins found themselves surrounded by well-wishers, including several prominent musicians who had been in the audience. Business cards were pressed into their hands, invitations extended, congratulations offered in a dozen different accents. Kenta worked his way through the crowd to reach them, his face split by a wide grin. You did it, he said simply when he reached them. You really did it. By the time they left the studio, clips of the show were already circulating online. Someone had captured Whitfield's failed attempt at the piano on their phone and uploaded it with the caption, "When you can't play the piece you assigned is too difficult for Asian musicians." Another clip showed the twins' triumphant performance, accompanied by fire emojis and the hashtag #Barberndars Suzuki Twins for the win. Back at their hotel, the twins were too wired to sleep. They sat in the small lobby drinking tea and trying to process what had happened. Do you think we went too far? Hiro asked, staring into his cup. Challenging him like that on his own show? Aki considered the question. Maybe. But he went too far first. All those comments about how we couldn't truly understand Western music because of our background. Someone needed to challenge that idea. It wasn't just about us, Hiro agreed. It's about every musician who's been judged based on where they're from rather than how they play. Their phones buzzed constantly with notifications. Messages from friends and family back in Japan, who had somehow already heard what happened. Emails from music journalists requesting interviews. Comments on their social media accounts from people they'd never met, congratulating them for putting Whitfield in his place. It's all happening so fast, Hiro murmured, scrolling through the notifications with a dazed expression. The next morning, the story had grown even bigger. Music blogs and websites had picked up the story, many using it to launch broader discussions about cultural bias in classical music. One headline read, "Suzuki Twins challenge Western classical gatekeeping, win decisively." Another proclaimed, "Is classical music universal? Japanese duo proves it is." Their performance had struck a chord not just with classical music fans, but with anyone who had ever felt judged or limited by cultural stereotypes. Comments poured in from people around the world sharing similar experiences in various fields, art, literature, cuisine, where their work had been dismissed as inauthentic because of their heritage. 3 days after the show aired, the twins received an unexpected email. It was from Malcolm Whitfield's assistant, requesting a private meeting at his London apartment. After some discussion, they decided to accept. Whitfield's home was exactly as they might have imagined it, elegant, filled with antiques and memorabilia from his long career. Awards lined the walls. Photos showed him with famous musicians and composers. He greeted them at the door himself, looking older and more tired than he had on television. "Thank you for coming," he said, leading them into a tastefully furnished sitting room. "I wanted to speak with you away from the cameras and the public eye." The twins sat side by side on a leather sofa, while Whitfield took an armchair opposite them. For a moment, nobody spoke. "What happened on the show," Whitfield finally said, "has caused quite a stir in the music world." "We've noticed," Aki replied neutrally. "Some are calling for my resignation from the program. Others are defending me, saying my views were taken out of context." He sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. "The truth is, I've been thinking a great deal about what occurred, and about the things I said." The twins waited, letting him find his words. "I've been in this business for over 40 years, he continued. I was taught by people who were taught by people who lived in the same century as some of the composers we revere. There's a lineage there that I've always valued. A direct connection to the tradition," he paused, looking at a photo on the wall that showed a much younger Whitfield with an elderly conductor. "When I see musicians from outside that tradition performing these works, I suppose I've always felt a kind of territorial response, as if they were tourists in a country where I'm a native." He looked back at the twins. "But what you demonstrated on that stage wasn't tourism. It was genuine understanding, and that has forced me to question some long-held beliefs." It wasn't exactly an apology, but there was a humility in his words that had been entirely absent on the show. "Music belongs to everyone who truly loves it," Hiro said quietly. "That's what our parents taught us." Whitfield nodded slowly. A wiser view than mine, it seems. He cleared his throat. I've recommended to the producers that you be invited back for a proper feature on the show. No challenges, no games, just your music presented with the respect it deserves. The twins exchanged a glance, silently conferring as they often did. We'd be honored, Aki said finally. They didn't become friends that day, but they parted with a mutual respect that had been unimaginable a week earlier. As they left Whitfield's apartment, Hero felt a weight lift from his shoulders. That was unexpected, he said as they walked back toward their hotel. People can change, Aki replied. Sometimes they just need a push. In the weeks that followed, the twins' lives transformed completely. Invitations poured in from concert halls across Europe and America. Record labels reached out with contract offers. Music schools asked them to give master classes. 6 months after their appearance on Classical Spotlight, they performed at Carnegie Hall to a sold-out crowd. The program included a variety of works spanning cultures and centuries, Bach and Beethoven alongside contemporary Japanese composers, traditional folk melodies reimagined as classical duets. In the front row sat their parents, who had flown in from Japan for the occasion. Takeshi and Yumiko watched with tears in their eyes as their sons received a standing ovation that lasted nearly 5 minutes. Backstage after the concert, the family embraced 20 years of sacrifices and hard work culminating in this moment of triumph. Are you proud of us? Hiro asked his father, suddenly feeling like a child again. Takeshi smiled, his eyes glistening. Always. But not because you're playing at Carnegie Hall, because you've stayed true to what music really means. Connection, understanding, breaking down barriers. As they left the hall that night, a young Asian girl approached them with a violin case clutched in her small hands. Excuse me, she said shyly. I saw you on YouTube. The video where you showed that conductor that Japanese people can play classical music too. She looked down at her case. I started learning violin because of you. My teacher said I couldn't really understand Mozart because I'm not from Austria, but I told her that's not true. The twins knelt down to her level. What's your name? Aki asked. Lin, she replied. Well, Lin, Hiro said, you keep playing. Music belongs to everyone who loves it enough to listen deeply and practice hard. She nodded solemnly, then broke into a wide smile before running back to her waiting parents. As they watched her go, Aki turned to his brother. That, he said quietly, is what matters most. Hiro nodded. What had begun as a humiliating moment on television had become something far more important. A small but significant shift in how the world viewed classical music and who had the right to play it. For every Lin out there finding courage in their story, all the struggles had been worthwhile. The twins had set out to prove themselves as musicians. In the end, they had helped prove that music itself transcends the boundaries we try to place around it, that its language truly is universal.